to speak on the topic that I've been assigned, which is, essentially the state of education in India, challenges and imperatives. So, just to give you a broad outline, I want my talk to be essentially in three parts. The first will be to consider the challenges, where I'm really going to look at the past a little bit to see, how we got to where we are today. The second part will be, in some ways, about the present and the future, which is the imperatives, what we need to do. And then there'll be a conclusion. I'll try to wind up. And I think, as Sunandaji said, we really want to listen to all of you. Oh, I see Pramodji has just come. I was asking where. Namaste, Pramodji. So this is a wonderful, vibrant, Indian community and friends of Indians in Houston. I'm delighted to be here. And as I said, the topic is really vast in terms of its, you might say, both its, in terms of its temporal depth, because I don't know if this is widely known, but the first, so to speak, academy in the world, the first recorded academy in the world, is reputed to have been in India, before Socrates and before the other things we know. And it actually goes back to the Upanishads. There is this wonderful conversation in the Upanishads about this young boy who goes off to study, and after 12 years of studies, he comes back, and then his father asks him, like, what have you learned? And there's this exchange, and this, I can tell you more about this later, I don't want to get sidetracked, but this is dated, quite authentically dated by Western scholars, not just by, enthusiastic Indians who tend to date things. 10,000, BCE is nothing for them,
Yeah.
But about 850 BCE, and it's a formal academy that this boy went to, and came back and was questioned by his father, Aruni Uddalat, and so forth. You can check that out. So it's supposed to. So what I'm saying is that the historic depth of our subject is vast, but also when we understand the complexities, or want to understand the complexities of the Indian education system, it's also really a vast topic, from primary education to secondary, tertiary, to higher education, and all the different people who deliver education in India. It's a very complex and vast topic. So what I'm trying to say is to break it down to something that we can discuss is not easy. And it's a Saturday morning. I'm not planning to give an academic talk, but it's really an occasion for us to reflect together on something we deeply care about. Because I think it's a truism to say that education is the key to transformation. Nobody would disagree with that. It's almost a cliche. And transformation, not just social, political, economic, which we all understand, but as I said, going back to that old Upanishadic conversation, it's also the key to personal, internal, emotional, intellectual, spiritual transformation. And I think that the Indian, so to speak, thrust in education has always been not just practical knowledge, not just vyavaharika, or something that can get you a job or can help you, manipulate the forces of nature to produce things, but to understand oneself deeply. And in fact, in this dialogue, the father asks the son that, do you know who you are? Do you have knowledge of the Atma? Where does the Atma reside, and so forth. It's an amazing dialogue in the Upanishads. I encourage you to look at it if you have the time. It's in the Chandogya Upanishad, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm saying that we were always deeply concerned about questions such as the meaning of life, questions about what happens after we die, the afterlife, and what is the good life, which is, I think, a question that people ask even today. Even in capitalist societies, people ask, are we happy? Have we got what we wanted to do? Why else would an eminent cardiologist sit here and take a video? He wants to fulfill himself in a different way, I suppose. And it's great that the society allows him to do that. So I'm a great admirer of America. I'm not one of those JNU leftists who's made a business of being anti-American and then send all their kids to America to Bryn Mawr or to Dartmouth or to Smith or Vassar if there are girls, and to the equally good Ivy Leagues or Stanford or whatever, and keep playing that kind of game. But so what I'm trying to say is that Indian education right from the beginning has been distinguished by being not purely practical, not purely this worldly. It's always been concerned about deeper issues. Now, some of us may not want to be interested in them at all. That's different. That's our choice. But this is something we can't ignore as we look at all our ancient Indian universities. In fact, again, it is said that the oldest university in India, I'm talking about the academy that I mentioned, is very old, but the oldest university also goes back to several hundred years. Nalanda actually comes later as Takshashila, where you had great minds like Panini and Aryabhat and people like that. And it's in present Afghanistan, which is, a broken society as we know. So it's an irony of fate or history. And that was the center of knowledge at that time. And then it shifted further inside. And Nalanda is now in contemporary Bihar, and there's a project to revive it. And there's a big backstory about it, which we won't go into because our Consul General was actually, should I say, the savior of Nalanda, the new Nalanda. But please catch him at another time and get the story. And he saved it from the clutches of very famous and very eminent people, which included Nobel laureates and Harvard professors and the who's who, lords, British peers, and so forth. But we won't go there. So as I said, Nalanda comes a little later. But I'm glad you brought up Nalanda, because in a sense, the destruction of Nalanda, reputedly by Bakhtiyar Khilji and his 12 horsemen, apparently there were not 12, there were 100 horsemen. But even then, it's a very small number of people, as you can imagine. And happens around 1300 of the current era, is a very important, I think, date in history for us, if you're thinking about education deeply. Because, Indian history has this problem with chronology and dates. Now, many people believe that the first reliable date in Indian history is the invasion of India by Alexander. We have a group of historians out here in Houston who have smarter ways of dating. They use technology, they use calculations, mathematical calculations, astrological symbols, and astronomy. They also in carbon dating. But anyhow, if you look at the traditional dating of ancient Indian history, they know when Alexander came, and then many things are arranged around it. And even famous Indian figures like Kalidasa, nobody can tell you when he was born. I mean, Natya Shastra, the dates vary from 200 BCE to 200 CE, 500 years, you're not able to date things. But, in other words, chronology is a big problem in India. You can't date things. So you don't know when does medieval India begin, when does modern India begin. But I sometimes, and I like multiple dates. I don't like singularities in some ways. There's a very famous book called Singularity, but we leave that aside, by Ray Kurzweil. I like convergences. And if you like convergences, you should also like divergences, right? So I don't like to understand the world in monothetical terms. I'm not talking about monotheism. I have great respect for all traditions, but monothetic and polythetic. That means that you should have multiple ways to explain phenomena, especially when it comes to understanding human society. I mean, science works differently, but as you go to smaller and smaller entities, subatomic entities, things become very fuzzy. So there are multiple ways of dating things in India. That's what I'm trying to say. But one of the ways that I think we can date the end of classical India, this is the point, is the destruction of Nalanda. That was my point. Around 1300. So when Nalanda is destroyed and burned, and there are academics who say, oh, well, in 1350, here's a text by a Buddhist monk which says that there's some teaching going on. And then I once tweeted, please read the whole text. And he says there's only 5 teachers left and all the books are burning. So they've been burning for 6 months. There were so many books. And if you go to Nalanda, you'll see the burn marks, the soot on the walls that have been reconstructed. Please go and see it. So there were so many books in Nalanda that had burned for months. And obviously the people who did this were not interested in what those books contained. And they didn't try very hard to find out. But one of them did. After the destruction, he said, can you please tell me, like, what is in these books which are still burning? And he said, yeah, sure. One of his lieutenants said, I'll go and find out. And then he said, sir, I'm sorry. All the Brahmins and the monks have been killed. There's nobody who can explain what these books have. And unfortunately, none of us knows what those books contained, except some of them which were saved and taken to Tibet. And from other accounts of Chinese travelers like Houstan, we have some sense that there was a huge curriculum that was taught, and there were students from different parts of the classical world who visited. Many got scholarships. They stayed for years and months, and Houstan also got an Indian name. He got an Indian guru, and he took back loads and loads of books. He traveled 25,000 kilometers in those days. It's an incredible story. Anyhow, but the destruction of Nalanda to me marks one of the dates from which we can sort of say that, okay, ancient India came to an end, or classical India. I don't even like the word ancient. Classical India came to an end. The point that I'm trying to make is that India has always been a knowledge society. It has always been, throughout its history, an exporter of ideas, of knowledge, of technologies, of language, literature, culture, at least up to the classical time. So for maybe 4,000 years of recorded history, and then with the destruction of Nalanda, it's not that this kind of knowledge-centric society or civilization entirely ended. No, it still survived, but it had a truncated life, because that is around the same time that you also have the destruction of Kashmir, which was the hub of Indian education. So it moved from, in some ways it moved from Afghanistan to Kashmir, and so in other parts of northern India, and there were centers of learning in the south as well. And these great Kashmiri scholars of that time migrated to Banaras, you see. So we had all these migrations, and a lot was lost, when, for example, when Devagiri was destroyed and it was called Daulatabad around a similar time. Then Patan, which was the center of learning, was destroyed, and people migrated. So this is the story of whatever was saved in India was saved because people ran away, regrouped somewhere else, needed some other form of state patronage. But schools of that scale and size and curricula ended around that time. And it's not that our medieval kings, most of them were Muslim kings, were not interested, but they were much more practical. They had karkhanas, they had workshops, they were interested in metallurgy, arms, and of course they were interested in the Quran by and large. They had calligraphy, and some of them were magnificent, should I say, patrons of learning as well, like Dara Shikoh or Akbar too, who patronized people of different persuasions and got, for example, Dara Shikoh got the Upanishads, Mahabharata, Ramayana translated into Persian. And that's how the Kayasts got hold of these texts, because in some ways there was Brahminical hegemony of some kind, and they didn't have access to Sanskrit. And they got these texts through Persian. And if you go to UP, the competition between the Savarnas means people who had knowledge also, not just caste. Varna also means letters. They were the lettered. It's tremendous competition, even in Bengal. I mean, the Vaidyas were more educated than Brahmins in Bengal in the 19th century, if you look at statistics, and Kayasts and Brahmins. So, these were competitive elites or guilds, okay? And some of them helped to preserve knowledge in India, but it was not at the scale before. And the Karkhanas were not interested in deeper questions. They were interested in practical matters, how to retain